Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another RIABU podcast. And by the way, a happy new year. All the best for 2022. The subject is getting paid on time, and I'm delighted to have with me Daryl Albury, a much storied CFO from Australia. Morning, Daryl.
Thank you. Hey, Simon. Thank you.
Before we get into it, and it's great to see you here, Let the Cash Flow, written by myself and Mark Lowdy, lays out 8 key principles for being the first in line to get paid. I've asked Daryl to pick 2 of those and to share his views with us today. Daryl, when we started talking about the 8 principles, you seem to be quite keen on many of them.
Yeah, it's hard to stick to only 2, Simon.
Okay, well, the idea is that it's a comprehensive framework, but in the interests of time, and because you've got a lot of experience, let's start first of all, if I may, by asking you which industry you work in, what your role is, and maybe give us a little bit of your history, yeah?
Yeah, sure. So currently I'm the head of finance for an Australian-based global mining services provider. So we're working in the mining space, mining industry. Previously my experience covers a number of industries: manufacturing, logistics, fast-moving consumer goods and services industries.
Mainly sitting in the finance chair?
Mainly in the finance, but I've had the opportunity to work in finance as well as the operational and or sales marketing aspects of different businesses over the years. So it's good to have that breadth of coverage.
And other markets apart from Australia and Singapore?
Yeah, other markets. So Australia, Singapore, Indonesia, Mongolia, Hong Kong, and supporting businesses, our business throughout the Asia region at the time.
This is all about getting paid on time, and the virtuous revenue cycle sets out 8 key principles. Are there any that appeal to you particularly?
Look, I guess the first one is that the buy-in of top management and cash collection. We all know how important cash collection is for a business. Cash is king. No cash, no business. Having top management and your functional alignment, pushing in the same direction for cash from customers is extremely important.
And you don't want a CEO who lets the customer off, and I've known a few.
Yeah, you want your CEO and your CFO typically aligned. It doesn't always happen, and there are instances where it doesn't happen in different industries.
One of the things we talk about is having a balanced scorecard, which is another way of saying that everyone should be measured on essentially the same outcomes, because very often the situation which results in the CEO and the head of sales saying one thing and the finance guy saying something else is that some people are measured, see themselves as being responsible largely for growth and revenue, and somebody else sees himself or herself as responsible for getting paid on time, usually the finance guy. So that's challenging. What about getting an invoice out accurately and quickly?
Yeah, key to the process. Having that accurate invoice, the right price, the right quantity, the right details, the right customer details, anything to stop that invoice being rejected by your customer.
By their payables department, yeah. So
and payable departments can be very fickly.
Do they all? I mean, this is a very interesting question, because my partner Mark and I, both of them, between us we run sort of multiple SMEs. One of the things that we have noticed over time is that unless you're really careful, your new customer won't always tell you all the things that they expect you to do in order for them to process the invoice. Have you come across that? Yeah,
I have over the years, and it's important. That's where the integration, of the process with the sales force, sales or customer, whatever it is in your organisations, that providing that customer-facing aspect, important for those people to be aligned, know what the understanding is for your business, as well as the understanding and expectations of the customer.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've noticed over the years is that can be a problem. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that we do lay out a checklist that you should go through in the book before you actually onboard a customer. That sounds really simple, doesn't it? But the reality is that in all the excitement to get a new customer, and I know this very well, because if you run a small business, a big customer is like, whoa, you kind of are tempted to forget that you need to dot the I's and cross the T's. How often do you end up performing the service or delivering the goods and then realizing that you don't have all the information you need to actually bill and get paid?
Yeah, that happens, and that becomes a problem because you're trying to clean up the back end after it's occurred.
And at that point, the customer has no interest
And
in helping you.
It's too late.
Yes.
So a lot of people don't like talking about money. A lot of people don't like talking about cash collection, but it is something that needs to occur during that sales
Onboarding process
and onboarding engagement process with the customer, just to make sure that they're clear on not only what you will deliver when you will deliver it, but then the expectations around you getting paid for it, because it's not an unreasonable expectation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we notice, and we cover this, is that in companies that aren't used to this, sales often need coaching on how to have conversations about the importance of customers paying on time, because very often their entire professional focus has been on finding customers, bringing them on board, getting the order and those kind of things. That's not enough, is it?
No.
No.
And to touch on an earlier point that you mentioned, the KPIs for a business and tying in KPIs around cash receipts, recoverability, day sales outstanding metrics. Sales teams will always have goals around sales targets. Those secondary metrics, it's good to bring those secondary metrics into the KPIs and the broader balanced scorecard or KPI regime for the business.
Yeah, that can be hard. To move a primarily commercial organisation, commercial in the sense of let's get the business through the door and then we can go and have a nice dinner to congratulate ourselves, to let's take a more balanced approach and let's take a profit-based approach whereby we have to not just get the sale but also get the cash. Is that an easy thing to do you think?
No, it's not. But quite often where it comes to the fore is when you run out of cash. Now, when you run out of cash, who are you going to pay first?
Yeah.
Now, that's always an interesting conversation when you're sitting around the table and go, well, have we got enough money to pay salaries this month?
One of the things that we say, we talk about, let the cash flow is all about being first in line to get paid. Why is that? Well, because the simple principle that if your customer is solvent, if they're not solvent, they're not going to pay anyone, right? So you shouldn't be doing business with them and you should contain the risk. But if they are solvent, they're paying somebody every month. I mean, you mentioned salaries, you mentioned paying the gas bill, but how do you ensure that you're one of the suppliers who gets paid? And the idea of the 8 principles of the virtuous revenue cycle is to do the things that ensure that you're always top of the pile. Mark and I used to go to trade fairs and we would actually have a pile of fake invoices made of cardboard. And we'd do this thing where we discuss which invoices, is it the gas bill, is it us, is it you, because that's kind of the way to think of it.
It is. You've got to make sure your invoice is at the top of the pile. So,
okay.
A couple of points in there. Customers, you will rate your customers as having, 1, the ability to pay, and 2, the willingness to pay. If there's no willingness, that you've got a problem. You shouldn't be dealing with those customers. But if they've got the willingness, and have they got the ability? If they've got the ability, you need to make sure your invoice is on top. And that's everything from having someone in your finance team, be it your credit manager, your credit lead, your credit collection lead, however you like to term it in different businesses. That person developing the relationship with their counterparts in the organisation, your salespeople, your commercial people, your operational people, depending on your business structure, the ones that have the customer relationship, ensuring that they're engaging regularly and talking about the whole process.
And ideally you need to do that early on in your relationship. And you need to take the time to do that, and that needs to be led from the top, I would suggest.
You do.
But you mentioned something else which is really interesting. You mentioned the need to have an accurate transaction, because if your customer is willing, if you have a customer that's liquid and is willing to pay you, but being like every other person in business, being quite happy to hang on to his or her money a little bit longer if he can, you then have to remove all the opportunities from him or her to hang on to that money. So discrepancy management is pretty important.
Absolutely. A clean process in your business is absolutely critical. And so depending on the style of business you are, it could be anything from, you might only invoice a customer once a month, and there might be a lot of supporting information, and you probably go through some sort of certification process with the client on that, where both parties sign off, and that allows an invoice to occur. That generally makes it fairly clean. When you're in a services-based business or a manufacturing and fast-moving consumer goods, you could be raising thousands of invoices to one customer every month. So it's important that if you've got picking slips in your warehouse, and they're ultimately turning into invoices. Making sure that that process is as clean as possible, so that if there is one red shirt picked here, there's one red shirt invoiced and one red shirt delivered and one red shirt ticked off by the customer and turned into an invoice.
It's interesting that you should say that. I mean, I had a baptism of fire very early in my career, 40 years ago nearly, when I ran a very large invoicing department for a company that was distributing into retail stores all over the UK, and it was exactly that issue. A large invoice for 1,000 items going into, say, a Tesco store, one picking error, one mistaken quantity, one yogurt less than you got on the manifest, and they would not pay the invoice.
Yes.
So you could have a £10,000 invoice held up because of a 30 pence yogurt.
Yeah.
And large companies are particularly well geared to take advantage of those mistakes.
You will, if you're on the receiving end, you will take advantage because it benefits your cash flow.
Let's talk a little bit about the mining industry, because that's an industry that's had its challenges recently. Are there any specific trends in getting paid? Have you seen a slowing down in cash flow as a result of the stress on prices and activity over the last year?
Yeah, look, so the industry operates on contracts, and the contracts have quite a defined certification and invoicing process typically in the contract. So from that aspect, from having a clean invoice, it's a contractually driven process that actually makes it quite clean. Flip to the other side, and you're part of the question about our customers go through commodity cycles. Commodity prices go down, their cash dries up, cash coming to suppliers tends to dry up. That's a normal part of the cycle.
So prices weaken during the supply chain, and everyone has less cash, and
yeah, contractually the prices typically stay the same, but their ability to have enough cash to fund the works is sometimes not there.
Let's drill into the discrepancy part a bit, because this is a subject that's dear to my heart. Because when I first came to this topic years ago, I was surprised to find that about 80% of the time, when you don't get paid on time, and you have a willing customer, not an unwilling or bankrupt customer, it's because of something you failed to do or you did wrong. Not only do you need to identify what that is and correct it. I mean, first of all, there's a challenge there, isn't there? Because quite often it's not the person that's phoning up about the invoice that is needed to correct it. That issue, if it's a pricing issue, might belong elsewhere in the organisation, or a supply issue might belong in supply chain.
Yeah, it could be if it's a pricing issue, you need to go back to your sales team and query, well, what's the rate card that you've put together for this client? Is it correct? Is it not correct? If it's a quantity or item issue, you'll end up having to go back to you go through your picking slips, you'll go through your warehousing, talking with your warehouse team.
Are the other functions always happy to down tools and help you resolve these issues, or do they have more important things to do?
Look, I think a lot of them are probably more engaged than others.
I think you're being very kind.
Look, at the end of the day, if the sale is not collected, you don't have your cash back profit. So that's a problem for the business, and that will become a problem for the sales team eventually. Even in organisations where they don't have a great buy-in to start with, it will ultimately become a problem. If you've got discrepancies on supply, it becomes an inventory management issue for your warehouse manager, and they'll end up having discrepancies in their stock takes.
So it affects everybody, and so yeah. So it's important that people step up and resolve the issues in order that you can get paid. There's one aspect to this which is, I think, fairly unique in the sense that you don't often, unique to the book and to the 8 principles of the virtuous revenue cycle, because you don't often hear this. It follows that if you have a payment term with a customer, let's say it's 30 days, and if there's a discrepancy, you have to discover the discrepancy and correct it well before the 30 days if you want to get paid on time. If your cycle is, I'll wait to the end of the 30 days and then, oops, I haven't got the money, then I'll phone up, you're essentially building into your process a delayed payment. So one of the things we talk about is the need for proactive engagement, particularly with large customers.
Yeah, and I've seen that in different organisations. Yeah, you'll have your customer service team, and they're generally your interface, key account management type process, and they're engaging with the many different aspects of the customer typically, and they would be the first port of call that would be picking up any of those problems. And over time, you'll build up the relationship with your customer, and the customer, you will get to the stage where you should be able, your customer should proactively be saying, hey, there was an issue on this invoice. We didn't get 10 of this. You've charged us too much for this. And then it becomes, be it your key account manager, your sales operations, whoever's taking that point of contact, then making sure that that's followed through and rectified.
So engage with a customer early, make sure that if they don't call you, you call them, and then make sure that those issues are resolved. I think there's one other point. We have a whole chapter on the Pareto in the book, or the 80-20 rule, if you like. You know, when you're looking at a pile of overdue invoices, it can seem a bit daunting, but 20% of your customers are responsible for 80% of your cash flow. So if you can ensure that you have clean transactions with them and you interact with them promptly, to use your dictum, then you can get paid on time. Daryl, that's really interesting. I mean, how do you feel about 2022? Is it going to be a good year for mining, or?
Yeah, look, well, COVID is still playing or creating chaos in many different countries. 2021 was a fairly good year considering what the world has gone through.
I'm guessing you're not selling a lot to China then?
No, there are still commodities going into China. And China has the Olympics coming up, and I think hopefully China opens up a little bit after the Olympics. I think they've had a certain policy in place, zero COVID policy. They're quite open about that. Let's see what happens after the Olympics. Yes, they're being very tough.
I mean, those who live in Hong Kong are really struggling.
They're very, very controlled and very locked down.
Daryl, thanks again for coming into the studio. Your experience is absolutely fascinating. Before we close, do you have any other advice for CFOs struggling to get DSOs reduced and to deal with late payments?
A key piece of advice is to review your end-to-end process. You've got to have a solid process, and depending on the type of organisation you are, it's everything. The starting point, whether that's your packing slip in your warehouse, whether it's your progress claim in contractual environments, whether it's an airway bill in a logistics environment, and making sure that every step along the process that turns that into an invoice, that gets it delivered to the client, that there is responsibility and accountability at each of those steps. Ultimately, at the end of the day, as a CFO, you'll sit there and you're looking at your cash in and cash out. Every business needs to make sure they've got a cash flow, a weekly cash flow or a monthly cash flow. It depends what suits the business, but tracking against when you're expecting those receipts to come in. When they don't come in, following up with the people in the organisation that should be managing that process as they should be.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Daryl Albury, vastly experienced CFO, giving you some very good advice on how to ensure that you're always first in line to get paid. Thanks, Daryl. Thanks all of you for listening. Do buy our book, Let the Cash Flow, and have a great 2022 with lots of cash.